All right, today we're putting some new leaves in the stock Cherokee, some leaves I got for free. They already have an add leaf in them. I'm gonna measure the rear and front ride heights, assuming it's gonna give me 1.5 inches, 2 inches of lift. Don't want any more than that, just wanna get the rear up. The rear is sagging really, really bad. I have the shocks off right now because I just dropped it down. I'm gonna measure it. It's probably dropped a little more with the shocks off. And then we're gonna droop it out and take off the leaves, put the new ones on. There we go. So this is 31, and that's 31 7/8 on the driver front. So we know it's leaning more to the passenger side, which we already knew that. That was part of the problem as well. So I'm just gonna jack up the rear safely and then get the frame rails on some 6-ton jack stands. So earlier, my buddy Terrence and I, we took a breaker bar with a 6-foot piece of pipe and we carefully loosened up all the rear leaf bolts and then put them tight again. And what we did is we took them in and out, and just soaked everything with PB Blaster. Even with a 6-foot piece of pipe, they would barely move. So they were rusted in pretty good. I was worried about either A, breaking off the weld nut in the frame, or B, if they're rusted to the sleeves and the bushings, they won't back out either. So I think we're good. We kept soaking everything just by hand, turning them. Once we got the 6-foot piece of pipe to loosen them, we used the 3-foot piece of pipe. Once we got them loose enough, going back and forth, we were able to just use a torque wrench and then finally a ratchet. So I'm hoping it goes smooth and nothing breaks off. There was a good amount of rust under this vehicle, and so that was my concern. Normally, when you raise up the frame and you let the axle droop, normally the leaves will, the axle will continue to droop, and something's holding the axle up. Might pop off the other side of the leaves. That might do it. The only thing I could think of is that the leaves might be rusted to the axle. I don't know otherwise. Yep, that was it. So on old rusted leaf bolts, the first time you take them off, I would never use an impact. Impact could just snap off that inner nut, so I'm going nice and slow. They're tight. It's a little concerning, but we did loosen them up earlier today with a 7-foot piece of pipe with the extensions coming all the way out on both sides. And they like I said, it was a huge pain in the butt to get them to break loose, even with a 6-foot piece of pipe. But we got them loose, worked them in and out, just kept spraying wherever we could with penetrating oil. In both of the front leaf mounts, the sleeves are seized to the bolts. And it's funny because the bolts, it seems like they came out of the nuts and then they just got stuck in the sleeves, and I can actually see the sleeve spinning. I was able to get the rear upper bolts out on both sides. Thank God those didn't break off. So I'm gonna soak the living crap out of these with penetrating oil overnight and just hope that maybe it starts to break loose. Could try some heat tomorrow too. And if I get really desperate, I can cut the bolts out, but that's gonna suck, and you have to watch out because you don't want to cut the mounts, and you definitely don't want to cut the inside mount. So this is how you replace center pins, Put some C-clamps on both sides of the center pin, grab it with the locking pliers, and one. We'll just make sure the shoulder isn't too long. Okay. Centering pins are really cheap to buy, so I replace them every single time I take off a set of leaf springs. This one's been a huge pain in my butt. Like, I'm not sure if I broke off the weld nuts on the front mounts or if it's just the sleeve spinning. I could see the sleeve spinning, but I don't know if the weld nuts broke because the sleeve was stuck. Oh, that sucks so bad. The only good news is hopefully when this is all said and done, hopefully we didn't break off the weld nuts. Hopefully I can cut the sleeves out and hopefully cut the eyes off the main. I could reuse those mains as add-a-leafs at a later date, so it's not the end of the world. This has been a bitch. It's been a big pain in my butt. It'll be nice when the rig's all done. Those rear shackles are like rusting apart. There's so much rust on them. I just wanted to get this done sooner than later. Right, so on the other side, both of the bolts they're seized to the sleeves. This one just came out a little bit more though. The other one came out completely. I stuck a pickle fork with a piece of pipe over it and used the impact. I was scared to do that, but I figured the bolt was still spinning. So either A, the nut in the inside had already broken off, or the bolt was sticking out about that far. It was already through the nut and I could see the sleeve spinning. So maybe if I can force it out of the sleeve. Well, that worked on the other side, and this side it started to work, and then it just completely stopped going, but it's much further out. So I think I'm on the right track right here. I busted out a really big crescent wrench to kind of hold up against the leaf mount and pry away from it while I'm hitting it with the torque wrench or the impact gun. And I think I can get it without cutting the leaves off, because if I can't get this off, I either have to cut that bolt out from the inside, or maybe start with the outside and then see if the leaf comes, or cut the bolt out from the inside, or cut the leaf, like basically start hacking at the leaf and cut the main eye of the leaf off. Right, so I got it off. I ended up just cutting the bolt. It was completely seized. It wouldn't spin at all anymore. I mean, it would spin, but it wouldn't come out even with a 3-foot pry bar on a pickle fork. The other thing is the center pins were basically done for. It was only a matter of time before that just snapped clean off. And then the shackles were rusting through, and the other shackle, like the paint came off, yeah, but giant chunks of metal were falling off the shackles, like large chunks, not just paint. Like it was big old pieces of rusty metal. So I need some new shackles in there. I think I have some lying around, but yeah, so that's what this one, at least the bolts came out without cutting, but still these leaves are shot. You can kind of see a little bit of a bend right here under the weight of the vehicle. This front eye was very bent right here, and even these, they had bent just so bad. Gotta get the axle back on the jack. So I always put the shackles in first and then the front leaf mount, and then I connect the shackle to the leaf spring, and then I kind of center it on the axle. And I always do both sides at once normally, unless there's a reason not to. Doing both sides at once, you can kind of move the axle around, do what you gotta do. Because of all the rust too, I cleaned everything up with a wire wheel on a drill bit, and then I coated everything in copper anti-seize. Okay. Fucking sledgehammer. All right, so I just stacked up the leaf packs next to each other to see if one was taller than the other, but they're both the same height. I know that on the old setup, we were sagging at least 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch on the passenger side rear and the passenger side front. So get the luck of the draw and hope that whatever one I put on the passenger side keeps it level. Axle is dropping. It's gonna come down. Just got back from Harbor Freight. I need a M14 by 2.0 tap. Could not find one anywhere, so I had to go buy a whole kit just to get the one tap. And that inner hole, that inner nut will not accept any of the bolts I have. I think you can see that the outer threads are a little stripped, I think from the bolts spinning inside the cavity. It just like destroyed the outer threads, so I gotta chase it. To salvage the passenger side hole with the M14 by 2.0 tap. Bolt goes in now. Weld nut has not broken off. I'm super tired. I had to stop everything I was doing and rush down to Harbor Freight. It was the only, they don't have single M14 by 2.0s, but they have a kit. I had to spend like $100, $90 on a whole metric tap and die set. I have a snap-on tap and die set, but it stops at M12 by 175, so a little short there. I should be able to get this front leaf mount in. I'm gonna check the other side next, and then I'll do this leaf. I'll see if the other side's messed up or not. So that bolt went right in now. So after fighting the old bolts out, cutting them off, 6-foot piece of pipe to break them loose, we're getting some traction here. So now what I normally do is line up the center pin, get the U-bolts on there with the leaf spring plate kind of loose. And then from there, once the center pin's in, the U-bolts are kind of tight, I get the shackle lined up and the bolt, just stick the bolt through it. And then I'll tighten down the U-bolts, and then I'll get the weight of the vehicle on the ground and tighten down the remaining bolts. So the axle needs to come forward and down. I got to drop this side down and then probably grab a third, fourth floor jack and do that. All right, so just kind of move the jack stand around right here, back and forth, got the center pin lined up. And then I also have a jack under the pinion so I could kind of change the angle of the spring purchase so they lie perfectly flat, so the leaves lie perfectly flat. I always like to do a visual on the center pin that it's in the center hole and not in one of the front or rear holes or just off. And so center the spring plate on the center pin. All right, I'm gonna do the other side before I even put the shackle bolts through. So the leaves and the axle centered so things don't get too cattywampus. I wasn't recording, but this guy just threaded right in by hand, like no problem. So yeah, you have to cut these down to length, like after you're done. Let's see what's going on here. I've been running lift shackles for so long. I haven't ran stock shackles in years. I forgot that they kind of, they swing forward like that when you're lifting it. It's gonna make things a pain in the butt. We gotta cut these U-bolts now. So I'm just gonna get an angle grinder out and cut them off. And onto the other side. This side's cut, torqued, and like I said, once I get the weight on the vehicle, once we get the weight on it, I can torque all the bolts and hopefully the shackles settle in at the right angle. I mean, they will, not hopefully. Oh God, it's really hot with this thing on. Now I gotta do the shocks and then get it up in the air, put the tires on and tighten all the leaf spring bolts. And then I'm pretty much done and I'm gonna measure it. I haven't put in the ZJ V8 coils in the front yet, so it's gonna sit a little raked and I'm hoping it's not too much lift. All right, so the U-bolts are torqued to spec, cut down. All that's left is really to jack it up, put the shocks on, and then put the tires on, and then I'll tighten all the leaf mounts with the tires on the ground, just so we don't preload them, kind of weird. Yeah, let's get to it.
Enormous, instantaneous.
Shocks are on, put tires on, and then tighten leaf springs. Two and 5/8. The rear driver was 31 and 1/8. Now it's 33 roughly, maybe 33 and 1/8. I don't know. So about 2 inches on that side. The passenger rear was 30 and a half. Now we're 32 and 5/8. So we went up about 2 inches on that side too. So I have some ZJ V8 coils that are way stiffer than stock, supposedly. They should lift the front an inch. That'll bring the rear down a little bit when I do that. I also have some coil spacers that I can put on, some 3/4 inch lift spacers that I got on Rubicon Express on eBay. So I could do that as well if it's too unlevel. But I think right now the rake isn't that bad because it's such a small lift. It's such a huge deviation from that thing. Like you could tell it's raked, and it is higher, and that's in the rear. But like I said, it actually sat, I feel like it sat lower in the rear before the lift, and it'll settle a little bit too. Probably do the ZJ V8 coils with the coil spacers possibly to level it out a little more, but I'm not sure if I want to go that high or not. And then I'm used to working on this thing, which is way easier in a lot of ways because everything's been loosened up and taken off a million times. So bolts just come out like they should. Whereas on this thing, everything was rusted, broken, and falling apart. But at least now we've got good stuff. Done with the Blue Jeep rear leaf spring setup. Took way longer than I planned on. Normally it takes me an hour and a half to do leaf springs, both of them, because like on this one, I normally just, you know, raise up the rear end, put the frame on jack stands, hammer off the tires with the impact, take off the U-bolts, drop the leaves, put the new leaves on. You're not taking off that many bolts. I think I have enough droop on the shocks on here that I don't even remove the shocks when I do the leaves. And I got enough droop on the brake lines. This one, we installed a longer brake line a while back on the rear because it was all shitty. And so we put a 6-inch lift brake line on it so it could drop to the floor as is. We got some big upgrades, I think, on the Blue Jeep for very little money. We got the leaves for free from a buddy on one of our Facebook groups, local Naxtra Facebook groups. We got the shackles I literally had lying around. I don't know where they came from, but they're stock XJ shackles, and they weren't rusted to heck. Like the other ones were just rusted into pieces of shit. And so the other shackles were useless, and that's what prompted me to do this now. I was gonna wait a year, but I could see the old shackles were literally rusting, and they were just falling apart. Like piles of rusty metal were coming off the shackles. The center pins were falling apart, and all of the leaf bolts were totally rust seized into the frame, body mounts, whatever you want to call it, the frame, the weld nuts. We had to use a 6-foot piece of pipe to get them off. And then from there is a 3-foot piece of pipe. And then we still stripped the holes somehow, fought the bolts out, had to cut one side out. The other side I was able to use an impact once we got it past the nut with like a pickle fork and pulled it out. So we got new center pins, new U-bolts. Like I replaced all the bolts that were stripped or just rusted to heck. Like the bolts that were just rusted beyond repair. I mean, now it's serviceable. Now if I go to lift it down the road, it'll be really easy to remove these leaves. They'll come right out. We had to we had to retap the front leaf mounts. Had to rush over to Harbor Freight and like pick up a freaking whole kit instead of buying a single tap because I couldn't find a M14 by 2.0 tap anywhere. After re-tapping those holes, the bolts threaded in perfectly. I still have to go retorque everything. And then the next little video will be doing the ZJ V8 coils, but we did get 2 inches of lift out of this, which is pretty cool. If you can, please like, subscribe, comment below, click notifications. We have should have a lot of videos coming up soon. I think we have 3 or 4 wheeling trips over the next month coming up, I hope. I mean, assuming my migraines aren't terrible. Blue Jeep is getting front coils and who knows what else. I got like a bunch of other stuff to do to it. Red Jeep, I think, is done. We just did the AC on this. I didn't do a video on that, but I replaced the entire AC system on the Big Red Crawler. And actually, we just did the entire AC system on this Blue Jeep as well. Like everything, condenser, lines, dryer, compressor, any O-rings that didn't get replaced, but everything's all new. It works great. I know we had it in a shop. They worked on the AC, I think 2 different times. It still didn't work after it leaked out, I guess, I don't know. So I fixed it, it's all good now. I suck at AC work, but it's doable. So I just cut the sway bar end links off because these bolts were completely seized in there. I wasn't gonna bother fighting it.